Thank you for coming. My name is Reinhardt. I'm here to present live streaming best practices. I previously ran these pretty much this same deck as a workshop, so I'm going to do my best to condense something that I usually take 3 hours to condense it in, and it was more hands-on. I would come with all my gear and show how I would run live event production. So in this session, I'm attempting to distill a lot of that. You're welcome to peruse all these notes. They'll be available online. Stream Media does a great job of putting all of our PDFs together. You can grab a business card of mine and email me if you don't find these slides easily, so that you can look at them later. I've done a lot of things over the years. I've written a lot of books. I haven't written a book in a very, very long time just because people don't buy books anymore. They want to watch videos for free for the most part, and just read free information. I develop a lot of solutions. I'm still actively engaged in Java development, usually around Wowza Streaming Engine. So most of my clients in years past have approached me because I know Wowza Streaming Engine very well. I deploy Wowza Streaming Engine across a wide variety of different types of network infrastructures. And I also write a lot for Stream Media Magazine. I'm a contributing editor. I have a pretty regular column called The Video Doctor, and also write features for the magazine. There's my contact information just so you can jot it down or have it available. Again, just robert@videoRx.com. That's also a DBA for my bigger company, The Makers LLC. That's my partner, Snow Dowd, and I. She's more on the design side of things. I'm more on the techie side of things. And I also now manage a team of my own subcontractors around larger engagements, usually around live streaming applications. So right now my team's in the middle of developing a pretty large-scale WebRTC application that involves Android and iOS mobile development as well as web front end. Typically, live streaming can involve all of these components. I do highlight Wowza, but you could insert, just about any streaming engine or streaming media server, I should say, into this equation. You've got all these different protocols that you can bring in to a streaming server. You've got different cloud offerings that can help you distribute that origin stream to as many people as you need to deploy it. I rarely have to implement an entire solution that involves all these different protocols and all these different options, but they're available if they need to be. And again, as I'm doing more and more WebRTC work, Wowza is not necessarily my go-to for WebRTC development. Right now, I live on Salt Spring Island in Canada, between Victoria and Vancouver. I have a US business as well as a Canadian business, and most of my live streaming event business occurs in Canada. The provincial government of British Columbia, the largest employer in the province, hires me to do a lot of their larger webcasts, and that's where the vast majority of my experience over the last 5 to 8 years has originated from and was the basis of this talk. For the most part, my installations are as simple as this. There's an RTMP ingest going into a Wowza GPU that's doing all the transcoding. We slap CloudFront in front of it and serve HLS out. Really straightforward. On a low level, that's going to look something like this. I'm a big fan of the Asia Hilo. I've also been working with Videon lately. They've actually got an Edgecaster encoder that I really like. I still have an older Shimano, but this was one of the cheapest and best HEVC encoders that I've worked with in the market. Their CEO and team is amazing, very responsive to support issues or even feature requests, continually developing the firmware. I've been impressed with Hilo's firmware updates as well. I use the Hilo a lot for civic government, city councils that need to schedule broadcasts or have a one-push operation because they've got volunteers or people in the IT department that don't really know how to that don't know how to run live streaming events. But I'm always usually on hand for critical events remotely. In fact, the BC government is doing an event tomorrow that I would normally do the production for, just like PSAB is doing it here. But I'm not available, so members of my team are going to be on hand to do that. I'll be working remotely, just checking things and making sure everything's going as planned. But we just have an RTMP stream coming into a Wowza GPU that does all the transcoding. goes through CloudFront for distribution. Their broadcasts typically don't go more than a few hundred per event, but they do have some larger events that are province-wide that might be open to the public that get anywhere from 3 to maybe 6,000 viewers simultaneous. The nice thing about CloudFront is that it gives you, I don't want to say infinite scale, you get 13 terabytes of throughput with a default CloudFront setup on your Amazon account. So if you anticipate you're going to be doing more than that, then you should clear the way with your Amazon account so that they provision that onto your account so you don't just see your broadcast shut down. I'll mention some things on as I go through my slides, just as I remember them as they relate to live production. CloudFront, by default, will have a timeout. So if you're setting up a live streaming server and you start testing it and you don't actually have a live stream going when you hit CloudFront, the default is the timeout for 5 minutes. So if you've requested an M3U8 that's not available on your streaming server and you're wondering, why can't I load this stream for another 5 minutes? It's because by default, CloudFront is designed to not continually make requests for a resource that's not found. So you be sure that if you are using CloudFront or any edge service from or HTTP edge delivery from a cloud provider, that you specifically set the 404 timeout or any server error timeout to 0, essentially, so it will continue to hit for a live stream. You know, in a typical scenario with file downloads or something, that makes a lot of sense, right? If I haven't uploaded a PDF and someone has a link to a PDF and it doesn't work, then the server shouldn't keep trying to find that, or the edge shouldn't keep trying to find it. With the BC government and a lot of my clients, they already came to me with JW player infrastructures, but you know, the player market is so diverse and rich right now that, you know, you can pretty much do what you need to do with any of the players that are available on the market. I don't have Theo player listed here, but you know, if you have a preferred vendor with a player, you're likely going to find HLS support in that player. Low latency doesn't come into a lot of my my recent work, although since I did a lot of flash dev in a previous life, I am getting more of my older clients that built cattle auctions and wine auctions starting to come to me now at the end of 2019, trying to get their legacy flash systems moved over to something that will work. And the problem is, you know, we have low latency HLS, which is nice. Wowza just released an update for low latency using CMath, which is great. I'm starting to play around with that now. But they're used to that, you know, sub 1 second latency that they would see with RTMP, because you could get RTMP really dialed in. And that's what all of those clients that did those auction type of events were using. And the only replacement for that really in browser now is WebRTC, so that has its own host of problems because browsers don't necessarily agree on how to do it. You can't just build a WebRTC player and move it around from one WebRTC server to the next. They all sort of tailor their offerings to, you know, how they manage their WebRTC sessions and whatnot, how they're going to handle transcoding, and so on. So I'm not really going to touch on WebRTC a whole lot in this discussion because, again, the vast majority of the live events that I do break down into something as simple as this. And I love simplicity when it can be as simple as this because it's easy to identify a problem. Now, one of the things that I stress, and here's the diagram of equipment that I'll typically bring to productions. I'll also rent higher-end gear if the case needs be. But I basically come with multiple Sony cameras. I'm a big fan of the FS5. I've got other Sony cameras to do other shots, laptops to do PowerPoint. I actually do a lot of lower thirds and effects manipulation with Wirecast. You can't see, unfortunately, with the lights in the room, all my lines, but there's lines drawing appropriate connections to all this. But I'm just going to quickly walk through this so you have an understanding of the type of redundancy. And with redundancy, you should, of course, have 2 of everything in your kit if you don't have it. I always have backup laptops. I have backup cameras, backup switchers. When I'm in the middle of a live event, I'm always recording to 2 ProRes recorders. This is per room as well, so if I have to do multiple rooms with my team, I can manage that. And also, even though switchers like this V60 HD, which I absolutely adore from Roland, can drive room audio, I always use a separate audio mixer so that I have control over the room audio versus what's going into the stream. many times I'm brought in to help diagnose issues with other people's live event streaming, and I'm always surprised if they only have one like aux coming out to a video switcher, that all the mics are going into these newer switchers that and they're affordably priced. I could do direct patch through, so there's only 4 mic inputs on the V60 HD, but usually if I'm working with an audio company like PSAV or someone else working the room and I'm doing the webcast with my cameras and other gear, I will ask for straight patches to each microphone. So like the panel that was here before me, if there were 4 microphones, then I would ask that audio mixer to give me 4 direct pass-throughs of the raw signal into the Roland, so that as the technical director of a webcast, and I omitted that fact, or that tidbit that that is my hat that I'm wearing when I'm doing live events, is a technical director. I'm going to want that kind of independent control. You can't really see it in this graphic because of the blowout here, but there's 4 independent level controls for the XLR inputs on that V60. So, and the other thing that's nice about that, since I'm doing everything with ProRes recorders, this V60 HD can embed each channel as a unique embedded channel on the SDI output. So if in post I need to boost someone's microphone, that's great. The worst case scenario is when an audio guy tells me they can only give me 1 out of all the mixed mics. So I'm at their mercy, thank you, to make sure that they're doing everything and not falling asleep at the wheel, and to make sure that audio is good. I work with one of my clients does a lot of surgical streaming and demos of surgical equipment, and I just had an issue last week where they were doing a trade floor, and we did a mic check, we did everything as we were supposed to the day before, and then the day of, I guess the audio technician felt the audio was too hot in the room, and he turned it down for everything. So the webcast was super quiet. They're all freaking out, and at that point, there's not a whole lot I can do. In fact, that client didn't pay for me to be on standby during the actual live event, despite my encouraging him to spend money on it. And so there was, he sort of told me after the fact that the audio was low, and why was it low? Did Wowza make the audio low? And I'm like, not really. Wowza's just controlling packets going back and forth. It's not going to make something quiet that, was previously had some volume to it. I'll use something as simple as my own phone or a dedicated iOS device to drive background audio for broadcasts as well, usually playing background audio on the live stream before the event starts. And again, I highlight redundancy in my description. I have dual records going on for the ISOs. The Odyssey's a really great tool. I could actually set it up to record direct ISOs from the cameras as well as switched output, but I'm only recording switched output with those. I record on camera, of course, as well, so if I had to back up, I don't usually run the audio back to each camera. I just have the internal mics turned on, so I have something I can sync to in post. Rarely is there budget for me to edit anything after the fact for most of the live events that I do, but should I have to, and if there's budget, then of course I'll go ahead and do whatever the client wants me to do. Usually that would only happen if there's a bad switch or there's a slide that they don't want public and I have to change some details on it or blink it out. But again, that rarely happens. So I've got redundancy on the recording, redundancy also on the encoding, and that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about as a module that I built specifically for Wowza, and it's one of the reasons I love Wowza as a server product, is because you can, if you have a Java dev or Java dev or have that resource on your team, Wowza has great documentation on basically expanding the capabilities of that. I'm going to break out of my slide just to show you what that looks like. So this is, I forget that this is shared. It's not a mirrored screen. I should have fixed that before I went up here, but I'll work with it. So this is Wowza Streaming Engine Manager. This is actually that BC government portal that's running. So they have this running in the Canadian region on AWS. And you'll notice that this is an application that I've called Live Loop. And this server is continuously transcoding what I've just dubbed a master out live stream, which will inject this offline stream that has a looping MP4 file in it. So the purpose of that is that, again, for redundancy or just an uninterrupted experience, you don't have to sit there and click refresh or build into your player a refresh mechanism to, like, if I show up early for an event, what's going to happen? Am I going to just see an empty player that breaks because the URL is not available, or will it actually play something? So there's actually an out-of-the-box module that you can use with Wowza called Loop Until Live. If you search Loop Until Live as one term, and you'll find the documentation on their module. Wowza also gives you most of the source code for most of their modules, so if you want to change them, you can. I built something like Loop Until Live, but it's a bit on steroids in the sense that I can dynamically change what's in this offline stream, so that if the client wants to change out this pre-roll ahead of the event or minutes before the event, as long as it's properly encoded, and I have an FFmpeg string that I can just send my clients, like, hey, do this or have me do it. It's encoded properly, gets uploaded to the server. The server's doing all these renditions with GPU. And the thing that's missing here, because I'm not going to demo it, is that when I have those two encoders running, I'll see a primary stream and a backup stream. So it was funny, I was just in David's session for the Video Engineers Toolbox, and he was talking about how, well, you can't really change encoding during a live event. I've actually had to, not by design, but because I have two encoders going at the same time, and the module that I built for Wowza will do this, it auto-detects when the stream name primary comes online. So when primary is online, it automatically inserts itself into this stream, and then it starts playing. If primary goes down, the module knows to start injecting backup into that same stream. So the common denominator here is this master out stream. I call it a proxy stream because it's generated on the server. The code makes this stream. The transcoder picks up this stream name, creates the renditions, and the module I wrote will basically switch the different sources based on business rules that I created for that module. So again, if the primary fails, it'll automatically switch over to the backup. It's not like there's two URL. I don't have two player URLs, so it's not like I have to build anything into JW Player or on a player level to support a backup. It just will automatically switch to it. And I've used that mechanism to actually correct encoding errors. Because I've got an A/B setup, I can intentionally kill primary. The server will go to backup, change parameters on the primary stream, bring it back online, and then it will just assert itself again on top of backup. It's not ideal to do that, of course, during an actual event, but if you had to, if there was this can happen where stakeholders don't tell me what's going to happen on stage before it starts happening. Like, oh, this presenter is going to show this video during their presentation. It's got a lot of motion, and maybe the bit rates that we came up with before the event didn't really take that into account, so I could go in and artificially boost some bit rates as necessary in that scenario. I'm going to go ahead. And I did meant to show this earlier too, just to give you a sense. Again, I should have mirrored these sessions, but and again, this is all blown out. Some of this stuff hasn't been color corrected, but and this is a government portal that I didn't design, but I basically did the JW Player implementation with my team for the client, and this is after the event. You can actually use JW Player's playlist capabilities to have multiple rooms available in one player. So if I was streaming this conference and I wanted to be able to switch between the rooms, you could configure JW Player to do that with playlist control. But more importantly, I just wanted to show that when these events are running, and I'm just going to click play here and turn the volume all the way down. This is This is the still that's coming out of the V60 HD. There's actually captions on here. You'll see that there's multi-camera switching going on, and those weren't live captions, although we do work with live captions for some events. Sometimes I have to have a a picture-in-picture of a ASL interpreter down at the bottom for a government event, especially with government. That's not a requirement for everything, but again, this was just to show sort of what the kind of productions turn out to be with the client. If you want to look at sort of how that content, it's not necessarily like the most exciting content. Just like me up here isn't is a very specific type of content. Okay, I'm going to come back to the slide deck here. Okay. So the equipment review, if you have any questions about that kind of stuff, feel free to contact me, like what vendors I use or whatnot. I'm going to go, again, more into sort of my role as a technical director and sort of sussing out live events well in advance of that live event, and this falls more into that best practices. I'm always learning what to ask to my clients when new problems present themselves. You know, on a very basic level, I sometimes have to explain to my clients what live event production means, and you know, you always need something that you're going to be capturing. In this situation, we've got a camera person in the room along with my desktop that's being screen grabbed in the back, and this archive will be available because they're recording it on a Ninja in the back, it looks like. We need, if they were streaming this, they need to, of course, have an encoder to push it out. You need an endpoint that's going to receive it. You need a player, and you might need an archive as well as, of course, the internet working in that room. I would say one of the biggest problems I can have, especially if I'm remote or in a new venue, is making sure that the internet's not just working on the day of or the day before or the week before whenever we're doing our speed tests, but making sure that the IT resources are available should a DHCP lease expire in you know, hours before an event happens, and then we're stuck without having our internet. Capture sources could be any number of resources that are available in the production kit. I'm going to gloss over some of this because it's not as important. Encoders, this is an interesting point because I know so many people, I'm on a couple of webcaster groups on Facebook where there's technically minded people discussing their solutions, and there's a lot of, I would say the vast majority of live event production that I see happening with smaller budgets is happening with software, right? They're using, a lot of folks are using OBS because it's free. It can do, you know, pretty much everything that FMLE from Adobe did before it and more. You can even use FFmpeg. I did the FFmpeg workshop yesterday, and I was talking about how FFmpeg can capture from a webcam, can capture from decklink drivers. It can capture, you know, it's amazing what you can do with FFmpeg. I usually use FFmpeg in a pinch. If something's broken, it's sort of my last resort to encode something through FFmpeg on a laptop that could drive a live stream. I joked in my workshop yesterday that I like to do nonprofit work. I like to do pro bono work for nonprofits that I believe in. One of those is Pacific Wild in Canada and the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And they wanted to have a live stream on social media outlets of the effluent coming out of fish farm processing to show just how much of this potentially polluted fish byproduct was being just thrown right out into the bay where other fish would have to survive. They were literally in a shack. They were like, it was a covert operation. They were in a shack that barely had two bars worth of signal, and they didn't have any encoding gear. And so I basically, they were originally going to use this really high-end Axis camera that had a waterproof casing that they could like navigate. They didn't need a diver, and they were going to like run this thing down. The problem was where this pipe was coming out, it was a good 110 feet, I think, under below the surface of the water, so they didn't have a long enough cable to tether this camera down to where they wanted to grab it. They only had this ancient composite video source that could get down there, so it was a very low quality video image, but you know, it was all analog at that point, and that wasn't our plan. We were just going to take this H.264 feed coming right out of the Axis camera, push it on out through their cell connection, and make it live on Facebook. Well, the last minute it didn't work, so I had to basically send them a Blackmagic design shuttle, an Intensity shuttle, because that was the only thing I had that would work on their ancient Windows laptop and had USB 3, thankfully, and I basically remotely controlled their computer with TeamViewer and downloaded a pre-built binary of FFmpeg and started streaming that way. And it worked. We were able to get a stream out. They were complaining about the quality, but there wasn't much I could do about the fact that they went from an HD, really nice looking camera to an SD source that was over a composite video connection. And by that I mean that old-fashioned yellow RCA plug that you rarely see even on equipment anymore. Again, just going into some definitions, an endpoint that you're publishing to could be a CDN like Akamai. It could be your own server that you're running on the cloud. It could be a social media outlet like Facebook or YouTube. Well, I already mentioned streaming server there. It could be something that's running on-prem at a colo or in the cloud. I will talk more about social media outlets in a little bit. The player could be, of course, anything that, like I just said, there's a lot of player offerings on the market, a lot of them free. You can do a lot with videoJS. Like I said, a lot of my clients already come with JW Player infrastructure, so I just work with that. It's probably the player me and my team have done the most development with. Let me go over here. So not every live stream will need these, and this is an important part of the equation to talk about with stakeholders when you're planning a live stream event. Do they expect there to be some way to prevent others from going into it? Do they need low latency? It's always funny to me when a client will say, "Oh, the stream's delayed," it could be up to 30 seconds with a default HLS installation, right? You got 10-second chunks, 3 chunks on the server. You might have a little bit of latency on the cloud for deploying that, and it's just like, well, is that going to be a problem? Oh no, I just think it's weak, it's delayed. I'm like, okay, well, if it doesn't matter to your viewing audience, then we can make it more low latency, but it might involve some more extra time on development and tweaking our encoding settings. It's pretty easy to get latency down to 6 seconds with HLS. Just do 2-second chunk sizes, 2-second keyframe intervals. Specify the server to have 3, maybe even only 2 chunks per playlist. There's more overhead in your requests that way, but you can get HLS pretty, it's easy to get it less than 30 seconds if you need to. Secure playback, I make that as a differentiator from DRM. DRM, of course, is going to be there for the kind of live streams where people, studio level content. Most of my clients aren't concerned with the DRM encryption on their streams because, again, if it's government or municipalities, that's just not in their rule book. They might want secure playback and encryption, though, especially with the medical stuff that I'm doing, and for HIPAA compliancy, having everything encrypted over HLS is something that needs to happen. And also maybe even having this, what we call the limited access, where you're using some kind of token string in your playback URL to uniquely identify a viewer so that that stream can't get out to anyone else. I'm actually in the middle of doing a migration project with the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C., migrating them from Adobe Media Server over to Wowza, and we're exploring different types of tokenization. It's interesting with the NIH and their live streams. I'm not doing a whole lot with their production model, but they have 3 levels of ACL, or access control lists. They have public events that anyone can watch. They've got events that only the NIH can watch, and events that the parent department, Health and Human Services, that department of the federal government has access to as well. So 3 levels of access. And right now we're just using it all based on IP coming in on HTTP headers. It could be potentially, you can do IP spoofing or any number of things to get around that kind of access. But we put the mechanisms in place so that we could do tokenization later. So I had to build a module for them in Wowza where an event ID comes into the server. Server looks that up against a web service that they've built on the back end to then tell me what streams to populate into a manifest coming out of Wowza. So you can do a lot of access control that way in a tool like Wowza on the server. Of course, and I was just reminding myself of how important discovery is. I get a lot of clients. I can get, especially on a municipal level, I'm actually in the middle of dealing with a city government right now in the United States here, that I circumvented discovery to try and, I'm too much of a nice guy at times where I want to make things as affordable as I can for the client at the expense of shortcutting or limiting discovery. And it's something that is a huge red flag that I would usually raise during a discovery. Having enough time to make sure you've thoroughly vetted every component of that event. So making sure that you have the right stakeholders and product owners there. With a lot of events, even like streaming media, it's difficult to have stakeholders present during planning events for your live streams. You might only find out much later than the start of the engagement, whenever that was, a month or two ahead of time. I work as a remote vendor for a production team here in LA that will do these training sessions for a global automobile manufacturer that goes up to all their dealerships in North America, and we go through a lot of planning. They run it essentially, they're the most thorough production company I've ever worked with, because they run it like a film set. That's what they're used to. They run it like we're shooting an ad, because it's critical. You don't get a redo on a live stream, so we leave no stone unturned. In fact, I would say they have taken my advice on redundancy to the level that I would love to see in every live event, where we now have a Mushroom Networks Streamer Pro, I think it's the latest version that they have, that basically gives you, an aggregate of 3G, 4G, LTE modems. You can have up to 8 in that one box. You can get, 2 from different, you can get 2 T-Mobile, to, whoever your vendors are in your area that you can get mobile service from. And that we always have that. With that redundancy, I was just showing the backup stream is always that one running over the mobile connection, just in case something happens to the hard line. Because even in an LA production studio, we had issues with a hard line coming in from Comcast. Like, we thoroughly tested it, we made sure everything was working, and in the middle of the event, and that's one thing my module will do, is if it starts dropping packets to a certain degree, it will automatically switch to that standby clip, because it thinks there's something wrong with the stream, right? If the packets aren't coming into the server, the module I built, which I've tuned now to basically account for, well, how long do you want the timeout to occur before it starts to switch over, so I can tune that on a per connection basis. But again, I was just highlighting that as something that you can change from rigorous testing weeks before the event up until 24 hours before the event, until day of. Working with a budget, this is probably the hardest thing to do when you're trying to run productions, is figuring out just how much the client wants to spend on redundancy. Right now, I'm going through this right now with a discovery for a big medical event that's going to happen in New York. Probably in 2 weeks. I don't know yet if I'm going to be flying to New York to help this client do this surgical streaming that they need to get done. I was sort of walking my client through the very same steps that I have outlined here. It's like, well, how important is this event, and how important is it for it not to fail? Because that's going to dictate our budget, right? What's our liability if this thing doesn't work? And it's just like, well, it's got to work. Okay, well, let's talk about making sure that we've got all of our ducks lined up, so that if there's any point of failure, especially any kind of lockdown network, hospital networks are notoriously locked down, and even getting a port out could take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to work through an IT administrator to make happen. They inherently don't trust outsiders, and that's for good reason. How do you present your bid? This is interesting. I know a lot of videographers in my area in BC. In fact, there's a Videographers Association in British Columbia that I've presented at. But it's interesting, when you talk to people about how they present their bids to clients, how do they outline it? Is it just, they come up with a lump sum that's going to cover every base? Do they outline all their equipment costs so that they know it's going to be extra if, something else happens day of, like, oh, hey, can we get an extra monitor over here? Or, trying to, again, cover all your bases in terms of what needs to happen, and outline it so that they know if they want changes, this is what it's going to cost. Usually I just spreadsheet it. I have a template that I use on Google Sheets that I replicate for, especially with the BC Gov and recurring clients, so they can review and see what's happening. Oftentimes, especially for ongoing engagements, who's managing the archive? I'm not paid to manage archives, but clients often expect you to have backups even months later, right? Like, oh, we just suddenly misplaced that ProRes master. Did you delete those, 10 terabytes of recordings that you did over 2 days? And it's just like, well, I'm not gonna just keep my SSD drives hanging around when you didn't pay me to just, keep those drives reserved for you. So making sure that, I always keep mezzanine files anytime I edit and output high-res 1080p files. They're gonna be compressed, they're not gonna be ProRes masters, but, again, just how those costs are going to be managed. Anytime I have a new event, vendors or I should say clients, will just presume that I've got an offering that's going to just be available if they need to change the next day or right before the event happens. like, hey, can we add a paywall in front of this at the last minute? It's like, well, that's a pretty big change, and we need to discuss who's going to be collecting the money. How do you want to manage? Like, you know, it's a big conversation that, again, I try to make sure during my discovery I call it out to the clients. I have some breakdowns here on what equipment costs can include, and of course redundancy for everything. So making sure, I usually just try to be competitive with the rental rates on my gear are going to be competitive with any of the locally accessible rental shops in that area. Because if I'm, like if something happens to gear that I'm using and I have to go get a backup at the last minute, I don't want to be, you know, in a position where I can't necessarily cover my costs to get that same gear into the equation again. Just some tips on, you know, presenting bids. You know, I know a lot of people love to attach documents to email. Not only is that not so great from a security point of view, but if things change, it's awfully hard to track email changes. And so, you know, using a shared document goes a long way. That may be pretty obvious, but I just like to point stuff out that's pretty simple and easy to implement. I often, like, the great thing about Google Sheets or any kind of spreadsheet that's online is that, you know, you can separate options out onto different tabs. I'm now going to start talking about on-location setup and best practices that I've put together for this. Again, I did make this slide deck to work sort of almost like a printout. In fact, with the BC government or any of my clients that I have long-term, I often will bring this slide deck, print it, and just hand it to them because they'll often bring me in for training to work with gear. They've, in a couple of instances, they've replicated the setups that I've outlined here so that they have them internally. And I go, because, you know, like, there's this, I mean, I'm sure you've all worked with people where they just think they've got it covered. Like, oh, no, we've got it covered. And it's just like, do you? Like, you got to have to prove some paper trails of things happening. Again, I only have so much time to go through this. So again, these are more checklists that, you know, seem like straightforward things, but it's just good to have those kind of checklists available, especially if it's a new venue and you haven't been there before. Just so you know, in my slide deck, if you download it, I try to do this pattern with all of them that, you know, I have a topic, I have what to do in advance of the event, what to do the day prior to the event, or anytime prior to the event, and then the day of, like, what are you going to do? And I break this down in my notes with on-location setups, encoding setups, playback setups, and I think that's the last category I have on that. So again, I don't want to necessarily spend too much time on running through all the checklists. A lot of it's straightforward. Encoding setups, I'm going to start to go into a little bit more detail. And this is interesting because especially if you have ongoing clients, people that you do work for, you know, if you're internal with your organization, you might be running the show the same way you did 5 years ago. And when's the last time you looked at changes to it? Like I said, I've been doing a lot of live streaming for the BC government for well over 5 years, and it was only last year when I was last year or 2 years ago, we weren't even doing 720p, even though we were on these government networks that could clearly support 1080p and higher. We were like, the stakeholder that I worked most was like 360p is plenty fine for these government broadcasts. But then anytime we start doing screen shares like this, you know, you can't read all, especially government slides. I try to make my slides really compact and only have a couple of points. I try not to have, you know, if you've ever seen government slides, like they're littered with text, right? And a lot of small point sizes. And so if you start down-resing that to 360p, you're just not going to be able to read it, right? It becomes, the information can't be carried through with those constraints. So typically, I come up with recommendations, at least 3 bit rates for a live stream like this. If I was broadcasting this room, I would do a 720, a 540, and a 360. At the NIH, they already had their production lined up, but again, they came up with a lot of like they were doing everything with baseline, so many profiles in our renditions with baseline, and only a couple, like their 720s at main. I'm like, well, those should be high profile now. Those, you know, you don't need to have as many baseline. Apple doesn't even recommend having baseline in your renditions anymore, and that's mainly because they are assuming everyone has the latest and greatest iOS device, so it's going to be able to decode high profile. But you know, those kinds of things you want to go through with the stakeholders too, well in advance of the event, is just like, hey, what's our strategy going to be? Because bit rates will equate to real dollars, right? The higher your stream resolutions and frame rates, the more cost you're going to have for the duration of that event because you're streaming those bits, right? So that's also another job that I'll do. In fact, I'll do my best to update this slide deck before I upload it to my S3 bucket where I keep all my presentations. But is a really simple bitrate calculator that estimates AWS costs based on cloud costs, right? So if CloudFront is whatever 12, 11 cents per gigabyte, and you're going to be doing a 720 stream, that's going to be at such 3.5 megabits, 2.5 megabits, whatever you decide. What is that going to look like for a cost if the client is covering it? A lot of times, I'm not my preferred risk liability is that my client comes to me with an AWS account. If they don't have one, we get one created together, and then they're fully responsible for the cost of deployment at that point. I don't have to worry about trying to monetize the actual stream. I can, some clients want me to do that, but again, I try to make my value add more, having the processes in place that they can continue to run things even without me should they need to. So setting up like Wowza on their infrastructure, setting up CloudFront on their infrastructure, on their account, and then they fully are responsible for those costs. And then I'm not trying to sell them like user connections. Like, well, I'll sell you a package that supports up to 10,000 users, even if you only have 100 people watching. I could make a lot of money that way, but it's not the way I run my business in terms of like, covering costs that may not materialize. Like, you pay what you use, right? And let's move forward. Prior to the event broadcast, again, I talked about testing bandwidth, going through each of those bitrate renditions, making sure that they're playing. Again, I'm going to reference David Bassoon's presentation with the Video Engineer's Toolbox. A lot of what he talked about, and his notes will be freely available too. He talked a lot about tools to monitor live streams, monitor live HLS streams. One of my favorite things to do with, and I'll demonstrate that right now. I'm a Mac person. I grew up on Windows, but that BC Gov server I showed you earlier, which is actually still playing over here. Go ahead and stop this. I know this playback URL by heart because I've been working with it for so long, but I'm just going to bring terminal over here. I already have this blown up from yesterday's workshop. But one of my favorite tools to use is Media Stream Validator. I'm just going to go ahead and type Media Stream Validator. If you will need an Apple Dev account, which is like $99 US a year, to download these HLS streaming tools. But if I type Media Stream Validator, in fact, let me just redo that with a more command so you can see. It didn't even pause it for me. Let me just scroll up. So if you haven't seen Media Stream Validator before, this gives me a quick description of it. It gives you a version. Geez, come on, I already passed it up twice here. So its purpose is to validate a remote or local HLS playlist. It's a very handy tool. You just basically type the word Media Stream Validator, any of the optional options that you want to specify for the validator to take into account, followed by the URL. And since I'm gonna demonstrate this live with a live stream, it's just gonna show that standby loop if I were to play it, but it will go ahead and show me if there's anything of concern. And there might be, because I wasn't the last to touch this live stream, so it's funny that I'm doing this because the client's probably going to ask me to do this afternoon on this very same stream. So I'm not going to hit the cloud path. I'm going to hit the direct link to the origin here. I'm going to send it the full adaptive playlist, so it's got all the bit rates, but more importantly, so as long as I haven't made a typo here, so it's just Media Stream Validator followed by that M3U8 stream. You can see, right away I can see there's 4 streams in this. It's going to start loading media, and because I haven't given it a time parameter, this isn't an indefinite live stream. It's not going to quit on me anytime soon. I can confirm a few things that are happening here because I know Wowza. I don't see a session ID in here, which is great. So these individual chunk lists that are coming through, these are auto-generated by Wowza's HTTP packetizer, specifically for HLS. The fact that I don't see a W and a number between this chunk list and the bit rate here means that I am serving it in HTTP origin mode, so it's a sessionless session so that the cloud doesn't get confused with packets for different players or different sessions. And it's just going to keep doing this until I hit Control-C, and it will start to, it's already outputted some issues here. Oh geez, there's my alarm. I set an alarm, so I knew I had 15 minutes left. I'm going to rerun that command just so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to tell it to look at the stream for 30 seconds, and it just takes a very simple T parameter, which I'm going to add right here. So -T, I'm going to let it run for 30 seconds. And so it's going to do the same thing, but now it will actually spit out. It actually makes a little JSON validation object for you too. So if you want to like archive your validation tests that this is doing, it gives you this nice little JSON file that is very intricate. Like it tells you a lot about every chunk and every, like it's a very big JSON file, or it can be depending on how long you let this analysis run. Oh, I just lost something there. Why did my, oh there it goes. That was weird, did I step on a wire there? So if I go back and through this, again, there's a lot. So it's going to show me each rendition. It's showing me that it processed 18 out of 18 segments. Hopefully I'll see similar numbers across. It gives you a lot of information about what that the duration of the segment, so I can at least confirm that WOWS is indeed making 2-second chunks from my 2-second keyframe intervals. If a client was saying, hey, we're noticing higher latency on a particular WOWS distribution, if I saw this segment coming back at a different value that we were expecting, I would know there was a setting wrong on the server and I would have to go fix it. It gives me information about the sampling rate. This can be important with the kind of module work that I'm doing on WOWSA, because one thing that has to maintain integrity between those switches, between those two incoming streams and my VOD looping stream, are frame rate, dimensions, and the sampling rate of the audio. So if I mix and match 44 1 kilohertz source with 48 kilohertz, it's going to end in some kind of disaster. RTMP is really forgiving, but we're not using RTMP for playback anymore, so it can throw it off. But this tool is very useful. At the very end of it, it will give you what it calls must-fix issues. I don't see any must-fix issues here, so this has been a highly tuned server. One of the great things that this tool will tell you is it shows you with each manifest what the average bit rate was, what the max was. So if your playlist, even if it's auto-generated by a server like WOWS Streaming Unit, if I said that this bit rate was 600 kilobits and it ended up being 772, this thing would throw a warning that it was more than 10% over. It's a little forgiving, but if it's over a certain percentage, it will call it out as something wrong with the stream, because adaptive streaming will not work if the bit rate isn't matching what you have in your playlist. If your actual chunks have higher bit rates than your manifest, then that's going to result in potential buffer install on a playback experience. So again, Media Stream Validator, great tool to do that. I often use this to confirm what's coming out of an origin. I'll run this against the CloudFront URL too, just to confirm that I'm seeing the exact same data coming out of the CloudFront distribution as I am hitting the origin directly. And that's Media Stream Validator. That's just a quick tool that I like to use a lot. I mentioned this in my workshop yesterday too, but another tool that I like to use is Switch. David just called this out too in his other session in the Video Engineering Summit. But what I like about this tool is that if I do recordings on a server level, I can go, as you may or may not know, with WOWSA and that UI that I showed you earlier, I can record incoming streams. But what I like about this is just a Star Wars trailer we were playing with yesterday in the FFmpeg class. But is this timeline view? I can confirm the GOP structure by looking at this timeline view. This particular example wasn't done to adhere to a static GOP, but I love Switch. This timeline feature alone, it also shows me if there's B frames, P frames. I typically don't like encoding B frames in live event streams because B frames, by definition, have to be reordered. So if you don't know how B frames work, there's plenty of Wikipedia pages out there to explain how H.264 encoding works with B frames, but I typically do not use B frames in my live event streams. I only stick with a typical INP structure like you would not see in this example because this has lots of B-frames in it. It's perfect for VOD. I just don't like using them for live playback. And that's mainly because I've seen some players mess up with B-frames in live streams. It's rare, but if I can remove it as a dependency, then that's great. B-frames obviously are a huge part of how H.264 can behave very well as a codec, but just thought I'd mention another tool that I'll often use to diagnose issues during live streams. Since I'm running low on time, I'm just going to go into some other categories. So I just talked about encoding. Now I'm going to talk about the video switcher, audio switcher setup. This is, again, these are the kind of questions I like to get cleared with the stage manager or whoever is running the actual live event that I'm going to be broadcasting or webcasting in this case. And again, just knowing how many speakers we're going to have is going to depend on what kind of audio boards and what kind of video switcher I'm going to use. One of the most important things that can be difficult to patch into live events is computer-based audio, and it happens usually at the last minute. Like, oh no, they'll tell me we're just doing PowerPoint slides, no one's doing embedded video, and so we don't have to worry about audio coming, because our laptop audio can be difficult to drive to both the room and a live webcast, because if it's coming out over HDMI and it's embedded over HDMI, your typical audio switcher isn't going to be set up for handling HDMI, so you need a way to break that out and run it to the room. Usually I will use the Roland V60 HD to run audio back out from the from that switcher out to another audio mixer so that it's available to use in the room if I need it to be in the room. There's any number of ways to conquer that problem, but it's probably the most important in question when I'm doing the kinds of live webcasts that I do is just where are all the audio sources coming from, and making sure that I've got the hardware to support it during the live event. Of course, if I'm doing more advanced things like lower thirds, which is putting people's names and titles and graphics, any kind of graphics during the live event, all the Roland switchers I use support DSK, direct screen keying, to do overlays, based on a green or blue or whatever chroma key you want to use. And so getting lower thirds well in advance of the event that's added cost, because someone has to prep those lower thirds, someone has to drive those lower thirds during the event. When I'm TDing, I'm often driving lower thirds as well as switching cameras as well as monitoring live broadcasts. So if I've got the budget to have other team members there so that I don't have to be driving as much, then that's perfect. Prior to the live event, just again, more testing with audio sync. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues when you isolate audio through a audio mixer and you're bringing it into your video switcher is testing audio sync. You'll typically get anywhere from 1 to 2 to maybe even 3 frames of delay, depending on how many video sources you have. These days, you don't need Genlock to have a multi-camera shoot. The video switchers will buffer 1 frame per video input, but that 1 frame can accumulate for each input depending on the design of the switcher. So you have to be able to dial it in. Most of the good switchers, those from Roland, let you control that audio delay, and you have to go in, and usually I just, I get these El Cheapo clappers from Amazon that we just do clapper tests. And then going back, that's one of the things I love about the Odyssey that you don't find in the Shogun recorders. Atomos recorders is the ability to scrub audio while you're watching a playback of a recording. With the Odyssey, and that's what I would, if I was doing this in a workshop, I would demo this for you with the actual Odyssey. I just don't travel with the gear for this session, but you can actually scrub and see your clapper peak while you're going frame by frame in the video. So I can do real-time adjustments, near real-time adjustments when I'm doing clapper tests at a live venue. It will add up. I mean, if you see a delay, in your recording, it's going to pass through to all of your webcasts and everything else. And so that's another thing to keep in mind with your switching gear. Roland advertises that V60 HD as being able to drive the room and your webcast or whatever you're doing with that switched output. But one of the problems there is if you start dialing it in with an audio sync delay, that will translate to the room too. It doesn't have the more expensive switchers will account for this because they'll have discrete circuits to handle it. But if I start playing with audio delay, and I'm right in front of the speaker, I'll hear a delay, and it's really unnerving, right? It's almost like an echo. So that's why I always have a dedicated audio mixer for all my live events, so it can drive the room. I can add delay on the switcher, and no one in the room is going to be the wiser. Again, it's an added level of cost, but something to take into take into account, rather. Day of, testing exposure between camera sources. Some of these are interchangeable with day before as well, but light sources can change. I've done setup in afternoons in churches where, light looks great, but the next day it's not so great. And it's not like we've got curtains available in a lot of venues, so a lot of times the day of is going to present some challenges with any natural light that's coming in and that we can't block or just use artificial light to make consistent. So be mindful of that when you're setting up for live events. These are great rooms because there's no outdoor light. It's just the available light that we have from these ceiling lights. Deployment setup, this gets more into the technical nitty-gritty and talks more about that social media destination, when to use them, when not to use them. I'm a big fan of social media destinations to piggyback. One of the nice things that Wowza can do as a streaming engine is create stream targets. So if like the BC government wants to hit their Facebook Live page as well as have their own player running on an internal player page for ministry employees to be watching, they can do that with a stream target set up on Wowza. Of course, Wowza has their Clearcaster product too, which I haven't used yet. If you want 1080p on Facebook, for example, the Clearcaster will let you do that if you're using a Facebook-approved device. I think I just read something where they're enabling 1080p now in selective regions, so you don't need to use a Clearcaster, but that's something to keep in mind. YouTube will give you 1080p for your input going out, but Facebook will not unless you're in a region that they're rolling it out to, or you're using one of those expensive Clearcasters to manage that broadcast for you. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. If you're using Facebook a lot and you have 1080p sources you want to drive, you probably want to look at something like the Clearcaster to use it. The government wanted me to get one for free and try and use it for development purposes, but I don't have that kind of clout. They think, oh, you speak of stream media, go get us a free Clearcaster. I'm like, I can't really pull that. That's, we're going to have to get one. I could probably get you a test unit, but if you want to buy one, we'll have to buy one. But one of the things with social media, and it's tricky because especially the more security risks that I could potentially bring to the equation with my service offering, I won't necessarily get access to the stream media, to the, have authorized access to it. Usually what I like people to do is add one of my Facebook accounts to their admin team and then remove me. The worst thing is for them to share credentials to one of their accounts with me. Then they have to change passwords, and it's just like, no, just add me to your team, to the admin team, so I can, have the Wowza can push directly to it. And whenever I get pushback on that, it's usually when we've had, I think, one failed government event where all the testing with their test account worked just fine, but as soon as we tried to go to their live government page, there was an authentication failure. Either because the person that they gave us credentials for was removed from that group. It was so hard to figure out in the post-mortem just what exactly happened there, because we were getting this denial of the stream from a Wowza level. It had worked perfectly before, and most people don't want you to do tests on their live page, even if you're going to delete them immediately following, because people get notifications. That's one thing I wish you could do on a social media platform like Facebook, is disable notifications for public tests, right? Or if I want to do a test to a government page on Facebook that, because that's what and it's a rightful concern, because if there's 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, however many people in the province that are subscribed or want notifications of a live stream going, they'll get a false positive, right? They're all going to get a notification that the government's now streaming, and that's all bad, right? But you can only do so much of testing against a completely different account. Like I can test all day to my personal timeline and it's going to go great. That doesn't mean it's going to go great with the actual page on the day of. Again, I'll just highlight that. However, I would encourage you, if you're not already doing it, to create some kind of error-free, uninterrupted live stream. I outlined the solution that I've built for Wowza. You could do it. You could probably do it with Nginx and some C++ programming too. There's other extensible server technology out there that you can do that exact same thing, but you don't have to just suffer like, oh, publish from the encoder and then it's available as a stream. No, you can make it so that the stream's always available, or at least available before that. I didn't even mention DVR, but DVR is becoming something that I would expect to be available for all live broadcasts. That can be a stakeholder decision. Do you want people to be able to rewind into the broadcast? How much of it's left there? I work with one of my clients. He's actually a business partner as well. He does hockey, minor league hockey league streaming in British Columbia, and we're only recently adding DVR to his offering. And one of the things with DVR is like if you're using the consistent stream name over and over again and you have a rolling window, you might actually have the past event in the DVR window, right? So you might see yesterday's game if you don't clear out your DVR, or you don't have it's just yet another strategy that you have to work out so that you make sure that people aren't seeing something they're not supposed to because maybe they didn't pay to see it. Okay, I'm officially out of time now, as I just realized, so I'm going to just go quickly into player setup. We're heading into lunch. I think if you are a full conference attendee, there's a by DRM lunch that's being provided for us, so I don't want to miss that. But I do have more notes on player setup. I'm not going to go through all these right now, but thank you for your time. I'm just going to end it on my thank you slide. Thanks for hanging out for as long as you did. If you have any questions, I'm going to hang out here for at least another 10, 15 minutes. I didn't even talk about my Insta361X that I'm playing around with live event streaming now for 360 streaming. I do all my testing on my fishing boat so that I can have fun while I'm fishing with new gear. And it also lets me test compromised live streaming environments, because usually when I'm in my boat, I don't have great cell signal, so I get to test things like HEVC, low bitrate transmission at high quality. Anyway, thank you, and enjoy your lunch with by DRM. And again, I'll be around. I've got cards up here as well.